Hey guys, this is Wraith, author of the gay vampire romance Everdark that you are about to listen to, performed by a multi-actor cast. The podcast would not be possible without her Grace Reed studio, which provides the excellent voice talent, and of course, the support of the Wraith Rain members who are subscribers to my site, wraithrain.com, which you will learn about down below and in the podcast. I hope you enjoy how the talented actors bring these vampires and their world of darkness, mystery, and eternal love to life. Now let's get down to it.
Last time on Everdark, Julian was rescued from the Order by Balthazar and Christian. Now that he's assured of his best friend's safety, Julian's own situation looms much larger. Now we turn to Balthazar, as he adjusts to not only having a new fledgling, but Julian in his house. Oh, and Sofia, who is very happy to move right in. Everdark, Episode 13, The Boss. Lord Balthazar Ravenscroft stared at the delivery trucks in the driveway of his mansion. Sophia Strange was directing several big, burly men who came with the truck.
Take that bed and this dresser and that bookcase and this desk to the Rose Suite,
She chirruped at the big, burly man happily. The Rose Suite was the largest guest bedroom with French doors that led out into the rose garden in back, hence its name. It was an exquisite set of chambers. Really, it was the best suite in the house that hadn't already been claimed. And it was now Sophia Strange's bedroom. Balthazar walked over to her, hands slid into the pockets of his tailored slacks and raised an eyebrow. So, seeing the future includes knowing other people's credit card numbers too? Handy gift, that.
COD, cash on delivery.
She gave him a large smile so bright that he felt it should illuminate the front walk. Grasping the lapels of his coat, she added,
And I love all of what you got for me. You're so thoughtful.
I am, he agreed with a barely suppressed quirk of his lips. There was something rather infectious about her smiles. He found that he wasn't really even annoyed with her presumptuousness. What really was the cost of a set of furniture compared to that megawatt smile? His eyes caught on yet another piece being wheeled into the house. Or 2 sets of furniture, he amended. She had the charm of the permanent guest down pat, and maybe that made him feel for her. He knew what it was like to belong nowhere and have to ingratiate yourself constantly.
I'm so glad to have finally found a home,
She told him. Another bright-as-the-sun smile beamed upon him. I cannot wait to hear about my greatness, he said, bringing up her promise from before. He had heard about Seeyr's abilities, but he didn't know if he really believed them. Maybe they would get something right occasionally, but existence was messy. How could one really see what was going to happen for certain? So though he said he was looking forward to seeing her gift in action, he really didn't believe in it. Rather like Daemon. But she had kept Julian safe until he had arrived, and for that, he could offer her a space to stay. All exiles need to stick together. She might still be allowed in Everdark, but she's lost her true home there. Her silver eyes suddenly sparkled in the moonlight, and her grip tightened on the lapels on his jacket. Her voice wasn't that of the high, breathy girl child she appeared to be. Instead, it was low but charged with excitement.
It starts tonight, when you meet your king, and he meets you.
A mixture of alarm and disdain ran through Balthazar. It was an odd mix, so he examined it closely. Alarm because if there was the faintest chance that Julian's missing master really was King Daemon, then he would have an incredibly powerful immortal on his doorstep within less than 12 hours. The disdain came from his belief that even if this vampire who had turned Julian really was King Daemon, all that likely really meant was that he was very old. Age increased a vampire's power. The older a vampire was, the more powerful the vampire was. Daemon couldn't be their creator. Daemon wasn't the first among equals. He certainly wouldn't be a religious figure. Balthazar had known too many vampires who got respect simply because they'd lived a long time, often at the expense of everyone around them. So he did not worship this absent king, and if Daemon really showed up, he'd have to earn Balthazar's respect. Daemon was already starting in the basement of Balthazar's esteem because he'd abandoned Julian. He said it was so Julian could save Christian, but no master simply lets his fledgling go. I couldn't let Christian just leave me, though he wants to. Sofia giggled, girlish and almost sweet, which drew him out of his grim thoughts. She informed him,
You'll butt heads at first, but then you'll see.
I'll see what? Her expression grew soft, tender as if she already knew him to his bones and understood exactly every hurt he'd ever experienced. It was an unnerving look.
That he is exactly what you've been looking for.
Balthazar was stunned into silence for a moment. Then he was about to tell her that he needed nothing. He wasn't looking for anything either. This King Daemon wasn't going to be anything to him but a big pain in the arse, an unwelcome guest at best. But before he could say a word, she gave him another kiss on the cheek and skipped off after the movers, undoubtedly to direct them as to where they should put her new things. He stared after her with a rather bemused expression on his face, then shook his head. Arceus stepped up to his side. She's going to spend us out of house and home if this keeps up, Balthazar remarked, as yet another expensive piece of furniture meandered past him.
Nonsense,
Arceus chided him.
We have more than enough money.
The confessor became thoughtful.
Do you remember when we were first exiled and had nothing?
Balthazar did remember. Their master, Roan Tithe, had been wealthy even for a vampire. With a household of over 100 Iros, it was easy to see why. The youngest and least skilled at using mind control could encourage humans to simply give them everything in their bank accounts. The most skilled could fleece the wealthy and take all they had, plus more. Yet after Balthazar slew Roan, he and his blood brothers and sisters had not received a penny from the estate, even though it was money that they had all earned under threat of being kicked out by their own master. Balthazar's actions to save himself and all the others from Roan's sadistic rule had stripped them of all rights and funds. They'd literally been penniless when they were cast out into Earth from Everdark. After they had been exiled, and he had been shockingly appointed their leader, Balthazar had taken it upon himself to make sure that the people had a safe place to stay and blood to sustain them. He'd conned a particularly loathsome banker who had gotten rich by fleecing the poor into giving over this house and all of his bank accounts. Balthazar had also tirelessly lured humans into their stable so the members of House Ravenscroft wouldn't have to hunt every night and risk exposure. Such exposure would have meant death for them and the humans who discovered their existence. What he'd told Christian about the difficulties of vampire existence when one was on one's own was a version of what he'd been through when they were first exiled. But he'd survived. His house had thrived. Though they had lost access to Everdark and the fellowship of other vampires, Balthazar had made a place for them in this new world. Not only would they not go hungry or be out on the streets, he'd made his house powerful. Non-exiled vampires came to him now for help. They might not reveal to others that they'd sought out his assistance, but he was known as a vampire that could get things done. And now they were blessed, or burdened, he really wasn't sure which, with their very own Seeyr. I suppose we are rich enough to afford our own Seeyr, Balthazar grunted finally as the last piece of furniture disappeared into the house.
I'm surprised you're out here grumbling about money being spent. Why are you not with Christian and Julian?
Arceus asked. Balthazar schooled his expression into one of mildness, but he was sure that his best friend knew he wasn't happy. Julian is lying down in my bedroom. Christian is with him. I asked Maddie to look Julian over. Maddie was the healer he'd sent for the night before to examine Elena. He'd asked her to see to Julian as well on his way out of his bedroom.
The boy just needs to feed.
Arceus shrugged his large shoulders.
So does Christian. Why are you not in the bedroom, seeing to them both?
Balthazar winced. This was humiliating to admit, but he thought he might be able to make it sound less so if he was casual about it. Christian believed that Julian would feel better if it was just the two of them, so I took my leave. Seeyr stared at him a moment before breaking into long, low chuckles.
Your fledgling kicked you out of your own chambers, didn't he?
Balthazar narrowed his eyes at the confessor. Keep laughing, and I may commandeer your chambers for my own. They are the second best, after all. Seeyr continued to chuckle, holding his stomach as he tried to quell them unsuccessfully.
Oh, Balthazar, you big softy.
I am not soft.
Oh, you are. He tells you to jump and you ask how high.
Seeyr's laughter was echoing now. You think this is funny, but it isn't. I don't understand how things have gone sideways on me like this. Balthazar couldn't hide his bewilderment then, as he thought about how Christian just had to look at him, and he was backing off. I really don't understand it. Christian not only is not hopelessly in love with me, I don't even think he likes me very much. He treats me as if he is in charge, and I act like it too. Seeyr stopped laughing, though a few chuckles escaped while he looked fondly at Balthazar.
You really have no idea, do you?
I don't. I have no idea why my fledgling is in charge. Balthazar crossed his arms over his chest. Then, with a faint note of worry entering his voice, he asked, Is something wrong with me? Seeyr clasped his shoulder with one of those bear-sized hands.
Of course not. Everything is completely fine. Balthazar, the reason Christian isn't enthralled to you is because you don't wish him to be.
I don't wish him to be? One of Balthazar's eyebrows crawled up his forehead. He knew that he'd been concerned that Christian would be enslaved to his will, but he hadn't wanted Christian to be uninterested in him. He wanted a little bit of the master fledgling magic.
No, you want him to have his own mind and will. You've granted him this great gift to choose you.
Seeyr explained patiently.
It amazes me how a vampire as young as you has such control.
Control? Not exactly. If what you say is really what's happening, I didn't consciously do it. Balthazar let out a sigh. I should be grateful that he's strong and healthy. But is it too much to ask that he like me? Even a little. Seeyr squeezed and released his shoulder.
He will. He just needs to get to know you. Give him time.
Balthazar nodded grimly after a moment. Vampires were immortal. All they had was time. Yes, I suppose you're right.
But you mustn't let him overrule you when you have his best interests at heart. Like feeding him. Bring Julian a few bags of blood, not ideal, I know, for him to drink, and then feed your fledgling your own blood.
Seeyr advised.
This is what is best.
Balthazar squeezed the top of his nose. Yes, you're right, as always.
Of course.
Seeyr looked all too pleased with himself, though really it was just the placid expression he often wore. Perhaps it was being a confessor that made him zen in the most un-zen-like times. Perhaps I should feed Julian too, Balthazar said with sudden inspiration. The thought of the young fledgling drinking cold bags of blood while he and Christian communed with one another didn't seem right. And if he was honest with himself, he feared that Christian would insist on having bagged blood too. If it was good enough for Julian, then it would be good enough for him. That placid expression slid away, replaced with alarm.
Balthazar, no. He's not your fledgling.
He's no one's fledgling from what I can see, Balthazar pointed out. Do you see this Daemon anywhere? He stretched his arms to the side, towards the bubbling fountain and the moon-silvered rose bushes. He's not here, and if he's not here when Julian is at his most vulnerable, he doesn't deserve a fledgling.
You heard what Julian said. Daemon cannot leave Everdark yet. He sent Julian on ahead to save Christian.
Seeyr reminded him. The big vampire curled one of those large hands around the ruby and gold cross he wore. Doesn't that sound like an excuse to you? I mean, why can't he?
Because he's not been fed in the millennia? Because he's just woken? We know little of what the immortals need.
Seeyr pointed out quite rationally. but Balthazar found himself still scoffing at this weakness. If he was anyone else other than your precious King Daemon, would you really be arguing on his behalf, making excuses for him? Balthazar shook his head. I think not. Julian and Christian should have been turned together by the same master and in the same house. Arceus's brow beetled.
That may have been what was ideal, but we must deal with what is. They are not both turned by you, Balthazar. Come to terms with that.
Why should I? Julian is right here. He pointed towards the mansion. He is in my bedroom being comforted by his best friend, who happens to also be my fledgling. Why shouldn't he become a part of my house? Arceus stared at him without blinking, as if he could not quite believe his ears. But his best friend was more a traditionalist rather than a rebel.
Because he has a master already that is not of the Byros bloodline.
What does that even matter? Why shouldn't we have mixed houses? You seemed eager enough to take in Sofia. Why not Julian? Balthazar challenged.
Because Sofia has nowhere else to go. Her mistress is dead and gone, while Julian's is...
Missing in action, at best. Balthazar filled in the end of that sentence.
Would you appreciate another master feeding Christian?
Arceus asked him, changing tack, clearly realizing he would not convince Balthazar of his other position. Of course not. But if I abandoned him, then I would have earned that happening. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. That answer caused Arceus to look more alarmed. His silver eyes widened and his gaze flickered frantically between Balthazar and the house.
You cannot. He is the fledgling of the king.
Have you bought any Wraithrain merch? If so, I would love to see it. Snap a picture, post it on whatever platform you want, and make sure to tag me so that I know you've posted something. I don't post a lot on social media because, I have to write. But I look at all my feeds and I'd love to see what you got. Links to my social accounts are in the notes.
Arceus, Balthazar began, his exhausted tone indicating just how little he believed that. Arceus grabbed his biceps and stared into Balthazar's eyes.
You must not feed him, Balthazar. Promise me. Promise me.
The same rebellious nature that had worked so well against Roan Tithe reared up inside of Balthazar like an angry snake. He knew that Arceus was giving him good advice. He even knew he should take it. But this little voice inside of him whispered, "He's not the boss of me. No one is. Not anymore." He removed Arceus's hands from him, not violently. His best friend wasn't trying to truly restrain him, but firmly. I will do what I think is best. I am the head of this house, am I not? He knew that he didn't need to say that either. Arceus had been the first to take his side. The confessor had gone into exile with him, even though he hadn't needed to. But Balthazar was all out of sorts. Daemon had been sleeping when all the other immortals had treated their fledglings like cannon fodder. Now, he'd made his own fledgling only to send him out alone in the world? These things made him unfit to lead, let alone to claim Julian in Balthazar's mind. I should have been the one to turn them both. This Daemon stole that from me, but maybe not. Maybe I can get Julian back into the fold where he belongs.
Balthazar, you know I support you, but this is foolish.
Arceus sounded grief-stricken. No, what's foolish is allowing a fledgling out into the world on his own. What's foolish is trying to convince me I need to serve an immortal that slept while the rest of us have suffered. That was the last thing that Balthazar said before he turned on his heel and headed into the house. Though he fully intended to feed Julian from himself, he went and got several bags of blood. There was a guest house in the back of the property. It was large enough to hold 24 people. It was where their favored acolytes stayed. These acolytes were the ones that eagerly offered their blood to their vampire masters in the hopes that they might be turned at some point. There was also extreme pleasure to be had through the blood exchange too, which was reason enough to be a willing participant. Better than any drug, better than food, or sex, or anything, one of the humans had told him. The guest house was overflowing with those things too. The best food and drink, certain drugs that did not taint the blood or harm the acolyte, and endless orgies. In addition to providing fresh feedings for the vampires in House Ravenscroft, excess blood was bagged for convenience and emergencies. That was what he had taken for Julian. He raced down the stairs to his bedroom. His heart was slamming against the inside of his chest. His palms were actually sweating. He lingered outside his half-shut bedroom door as he tried to calm himself before going inside. He was as giddy as a schoolboy. He needed to be controlled. Maddie was speaking to the two boys. Her Scottish brogue was pleasant and low.
You just need to eat, Julian,
she advised.
The turning is hard on the body and the spirit. Being away from your master is making it quite a bit worse.
Yes, it is. But we'll fix that.
I was able to hear him earlier. Daemon, I mean,
Julian said, his voice tinted with worry.
In my head, like telepathy, but I can't now.
There was a pause as Maddie took this in. Balthazar was shocked too. Full telepathy? That was rare, especially between master and newly born fledgling. Finally, the healer responded.
That's a rare gift. I'm guessing that the silence now is again to do with you being low on energy. You need blood.
Balthazar took that moment to enter his bedroom. And he shall have it. Both of them shall. He held the blood packs in front of him, as if they were exhibits of his intention not to feed Julian himself. He grimaced as he realized that he was hiding what he wished to do from Maddie. He must believe that the healer too would think feeding Julian was wrong. I just don't want to be part of another argument. One with Arceus is enough. But he didn't believe that. Not really. He just didn't want to be convinced that trying to take Julian as his own was a bad idea. Maddie was over 300 years old. She had black hair cut in a severe bob to her shoulders. She had high cheekbones and creamy skin. She'd been a wise woman in her village before she was turned. He'd heard rumors that Roan had pretended to be summoned by one of her spells. After she had failed to cure a local girl's illness, she had sought out immortal beings who walk the earth, and Roan had appeared by her fire. She'd cast this spell because she wanted to offer her soul in exchange for the ability to heal even the most grievously sick. Roan had promised her that she'd have the time to learn treatments that she couldn't even contemplate if she abandoned her mortal life. And he hadn't lied. Medicine had become a true science, rather than an art relying on leeches and bloodletting over the centuries. Diseases that had once killed easily could now be cured just as easily. She smiled at Balthazar and rose from where she'd been sitting on the edge of his bed. Julian was stretched out on it, looking small and rather pale against the mound of pillows. Christian was staring daggers at him as Balthazar approached them. Balthazar guessed that Christian was just feeling extra protective of his best friend and tried not to take it personally. Tried and failed, but he tried nonetheless.
This will set you up right, Julian.
Maddie patted Julian's arm.
Just drink and you'll feel much better.
Julian nodded tiredly, though he showed little enthusiasm to drink up the red liquid in the sterile plastic. Maddie left Julian's side and went towards the door. He stopped her just as she reached the threshold. "How is Elena?" he asked her.
She'll recover.
Maddie's expression was sad.
Physically, that is. But losing a fledgling isn't something that can ever truly be forgotten.
"Is there anything I can do for her?" Balthazar searched Maddie's face. He would do whatever it took to bring Elena back to full health. He'd put feelers out for Timothy's whereabouts, but had found no trace of the vampire. He had a grim idea why that was. Timothy must have betrayed him. Perhaps he'd been working for the Order all along. Perhaps the Order had offered to let him back into Everdark if he played traitor. There were too many maybes. He thrust thoughts of Timothy out of his head. It was no good thinking of him now. She smiled again, that simple, sweet smile.
Just be there for her, Balthazar. Having a new fledgling in the house will both help her refocus and hurt a little too, but it will help more than it will hurt.
He nodded. He had a new fledgling, while Elena had lost hers. He would have to be sensitive to that. "Thank you for all your help." She inclined her head.
Of course. I'll go sit with her.
She drifted out of the room, closing the door behind her. He stared at that closed door for some time, feeling as nervous as a fledgling himself. Slowly, he turned towards the two new vampires in the room. Julian was looking at him with faint interest, while Christian's gaze was as sharp as broken glass.
What are you really here for?
Christian snapped. To feed you both. The words popped out easily.
We each get a bag of blood?
Julian made a face, but he reached for one of the bags. No, not exactly. Balthazar handed both bags to Julian and stopped him when he tried to hand one to Christian. I will be feeding Christian directly. Those are both for you, if you want them. Christian bristled.
If it's possible to drink blood from a bag rather than from you, I'll choose the bag.
Balthazar kept his tone even, reasonable, as he answered, We discussed this, Christian. That is not an option. But if it was not clear before, let me make it so now. Drinking from your master will ensure that you continue to thrive, especially in the beginning years.
Years?
A bleak expression flitted across Christian's face. Balthazar smiled ruefully. Still trying to get rid of me, I see. But yes, years. Christian didn't answer that, but instead asked,
But what about Julian? He's not able to feed from his master. What happens to him? Will he get sick or something?
Many things can happen, Balthazar said carefully. His powers may manifest wildly. He may experience depressions that he cannot escape from. He certainly won't be as strong as he should be. He may even go into a frenzy and kill people. And in some cases, in some rare cases, the fledglings take their own lives. Both young men stared at him in horror.
That's not good.
Julian looked down at the bags of blood in his hands. No, it isn't. Balthazar sank down on the edge of the bed where Maddie had vacated. He'd come to a decision. It was far better than Arceus's complete condemnation, or his intention to make Julian feed from him no matter what. He would give Julian a choice. You can drink blood from those bags and roll the dice as to what happens to you. Or there is another choice, one that would perhaps save you from the fate I've described.
What is that?
Christian demanded on behalf of his best friend. This was the moment of truth. This was his chance to pull Julian into the fold. Balthazar drew in a centering breath. I could feed you, just like I feed Christian. I could be your master instead of Daemon. What do you say? Join us next time for episode 14, Choices.
Many people have asked us if there are ebooks of the Everdark series. Yes, now there are ebooks, as well as Everdark merch. Ebooks are available in PDF, EPUB, and Mobi from our own merch shop. Just follow the link in the notes to the Everdark series to read on your phone or any device. And check out the t-shirts, mugs, art prints, and pop sockets while you're at it. Your support really matters to us as small creators, and any purchases go directly to supporting the creation of more stories, just like Everdark and Dragon's Reign. Thanks, you guys.
The Everdark podcast by Ex Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thelis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.